Falcon Napier. Welcome to the Circle of Brilliance. Today we're going to continue our discussion around the subject of universal human values. Do such things exist? If so, what might they be? And where do they live on the change grid? And so we went to a couple of different sources available online. If you were to do a search about universal human values, you will find countless articles that proclaim the existence of X number of human values that are consistent across all humans, across all cultures, across all of history, and they'll give you a handful of them. What we learned looking at those were that a lot of them were very debatable. And so we asked ChatGPT to generate a list for us, and it came up with this list of essential universal human values. I think there's a couple of dozen of them. 24 of them. And we started talking about these last time around just to see if we could figure out, is that really a human value? At what point in the development of a human being does this value appear? So is it something that comes in at birth and it's more instinctual? Or is it something that really is learned from other people around us? But is done uniformly enough, consistently enough that we could say it really is a value that is shared by all of humanity. So you guys can certainly go back and listen to the last one, but I think we covered the first 7 or so. And if I'm not mistaken, let me kind of work our way through these real quickly. We said that maybe only one of them was truly a universal human value. And I think that might have been preservation for life. And even for that one, we said, is that really a human value that's shared by everyone? Or is that an instinctual sort of, I don't want to say capability, I want to say instinct. It's an instinct that reminds every human being that we need to make sure that the life of a human being is somehow or another protected. Someone threw under the discussion that might be true for how humans view the life of children or infants, but how do they feel about preserving the life of every human being from every culture, et cetera, et cetera. So it seems that our drive to preserve life is impacted in some way or another as life goes on. Pardon me. As I work my way through these, if you guys want to chime in and add anything, feel free to do so. Otherwise, I think we had some nice dialogue around these last time ago. Concern for the well-being of others. Again, I think, is that something that's more about nurturing family members, children in particular? That's the kind of where the instinct comes from, because I don't really know that if we look at our daily lives and see all the people that are suffering in so many ways, near and far, if we were truly concerned for the well-being of others, how would that affect the decisions that we make and the laws that we put into effect and things like that? So this again seems to be something that would hold true when we're talking about babies and little kids and that sort of thing, and maybe for family members and close friends, whatever. But it's not as all-inclusive as this statement would imply. Thoughts about either one of those two yet? You guys agreeing with this?
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. We got to number 3, social cooperation, and that seemed to be more of a matter of not so much survival as in terms of true physical survival, although there might actually be some times when we need to work as a collective in order to protect ourselves physically. Maybe that's why we build enclosures around habitats or something like that, just to kind of keep threatening animals at bay or whatever. Maybe we need to cooperate for all that. But this seemed to be something that was a little bit more practically driven, as opposed to saying this is truly a human value where society always favors cooperating with society. Now, this quest for knowledge and understanding, we said, well, that might go back to being an instinctual kind of thing, or maybe it's something that's part of the autonomic nervous system, because when a baby is born, they're fresh. They don't know anything. Obviously they have a basic operating system, but they haven't been programmed and they haven't had very much content installed yet. And so it seems like it's a very normal, natural, instinctual thing again for our species to be very much curious about everything that's going on in the world around it. Because we have to learn, are we safe? Are we secure? Later on happy and healthy. But this quest for knowledge and understanding after a certain point in life, I don't know what age that would be, but does your quest for knowledge and understanding remain throughout your lifetime? Or is it more of a season of life? Anything you want to throw in about either of
That's
those?
a good question, actually, because the more we're talking about these things, the more I begin to question, uh, there are some biological uh, needs, if you will, of the human experience. And I don't know, like, if those can be considered values per se, but I
Mhm.
would think that we all share those. I wonder how are we characterizing values in this
Well,
context?
yeah, I think that what we were saying is that values are the things we hold that influence or impact all the decisions that we make.
Hmm.
So they're kind of like governing principles in the way that human beings conduct themselves, as opposed to
Right.
something that is instinctual, which I get it. We all share that behavior set, but just because we share a behavior set doesn't mean that we attribute any kind of value to it or we describe it as being a value, like we're making this choice to somehow or another care for the well-being of others. I don't know that we've still stumbled across a truly universal human value.
Right, because I would consider even that word principle, right? Like there's PLE, which
Mhm.
is, it's regenerative. These are things that you will see in nature. They reproduce after themselves. But principle in terms of PAL
Yeah.
just could mean like it's a preference, it's more important to
Yeah,
you.
right. We're right. It's top of the list. It's top of
Right,
the list. Yeah, and I
right.
think that's what we really are on this quest for. It's like, is there anything that unites all of humanity? Now, let me go through just two more of these, and then I want to show you where these live on the change grid to see if this is pointing us in some direction about understanding the universality of the human experience. But respect for family and kinship. And again, this one was rather quickly put into the category of how we were actually raised. So, as far as our culture is concerned, as far as our specific family unit is concerned, how those things were presented to us, trained into us, instilled in us, etc., may make some people have a far higher level of respect for family and kinship, while others may be much more lone wolves operating in their own little, private kind of world. Um, that being said, even though I'm very much a loner, we've talked about my dysfunctional family many times up to now, but that I still know that when I'm around people that I can tell have very strong family connections, and they really do support and love and all that one. I certainly respect what they have. It's just not something that I ever really experienced much of. So yeah. So I think this one we decided was something that was a little bit more about how you were nurtured. Yep. And then justice and fairness, the concept of justice and fairness, the idea that individuals should be treated equitably. Obviously, this continues to be a real battle for our
Hmm.
cultures. Otherwise, why is Tim on the call? Yeah, otherwise, Tim, would we need courses and research being done in the DEI space if this was truly an instinctual kind of value? What do you think?
No, we would not, but unfortunately we do. And when I think about the employee experience, we have been wrestling with this from the very beginning, just in terms of trying to create fairness in the workplace. And that's why we have all these employment laws, and that's why we have company policies and procedures on how we should behave and treat one another. So
Right, right.
unfortunately, but I think also that it's due to conflicting values. What's important to me may be different from what's important to you, and it may be different from what the organization feels is important. Because when you think about it, organizations have values as well.
Absolutely.
And so that conflict arises when my values don't match up with the organization's values.
Yeah, yep, yep,
Mm-hmm.
yep, yep. And so, what does that tell us as far as something being a universal trait? Maybe all of us want to be treated with fairly and with justice and all that sort of stuff. We might have that as a universally shared desire at the individual level, but it doesn't necessarily inform our behavior in relations with other people.
I think it's aspirational, T.
Aspirational, okay? With that, we think it'd be great if someday someone would somehow, yeah, yeah. Okay, and then number seven, this idea about appreciation for beauty and aesthetics. Um, I'd be very curious to see where that one fits on the change grid. Because the others I can put pretty easily. In fact, let's just go ahead and do that real quickly so we can move on to some new ones. The first one was about having a great concern. Was concern the word? No, preservation of life. Where on the change grid do you think you would be positioned if you had a real interest in the preservation of life? If you were actively thinking that, feeling that, doing that, where on the grid would that be?
Well, it's either outgrid or upgrid, and I can't decide which.
Okay, well, let's do the case first for being upgrid. In order for you to care about the preservation, so you said the preservation of life, that statement alone seems to imply that there is something in the environment that might be threatening the life of the person. Maybe not a threat that's overt and in your face, but maybe just this feeling that things aren't as they should be in order to optimize the preservation of this particular life. And so that's the case for being a little bit upgrid. So we're seeing that there's an imbalance. We're seeing there's a puzzle. The challenge is slightly higher than that individual's. So their life is somehow or another being put under some sort of test, stress, pressure, whatever. And we want to make sure we can do anything we can do to keep that life, living. I mean, I know we're talking about people, but I just came in from doing some work in the garden, and right now it's 110 degrees here. So you can imagine everything is feeling very stressed. And I'm looking at all these plants that are in pots that tend to dry out quickly. And I'm going like, do you need some water? Do you need some shade? It's like, I don't want these plants to die. So I am interested in preserving their life. And as a result, I'm trying to observe and deal with whatever threats that life might have to it.
So, T, do you feel upgrid about it or outgrid about it?
Well, now that was the second case to be built around it. I would say to you that first and foremost, I'm feeling a bit upgrid about the situation, but not upgrid in stress or even northern power stress. I still feel like I'm inside of the green circle, but I'm more in this upgrade kind of wedge where I'm being observant of, acknowledging of these things that could pose challenges for the health and vitality of these things I care about. You can apply whatever life form you want to that scenario. I think it'll hold true. Now, if on the other hand, I'm a little bit more outgrid about it, well, then I would kind of like be turning that preservation of life into a bit more of a mission that I want to extend to a greater kind of population, as opposed to just being concerned with myself and those things close to me, near and dear. This feels a little bit more on track for providing a service, building an enterprise around such things. Maybe there are great businesses to offer people who aren't living the kind of vitality that they really want. Chris said he melts at 92. 110 without humidity is really no worse than 92 with humidity. So in fact, I think it's actually more tolerable. It's hot, but that's the only thing it is hot. Okay, so I think that that would be the difference to me. Out here on the upgrade side of things, I'd be more on a mission to do
Hmm.
something. What do you guys think about that, Brian? Because
Yeah, I like that idea because,
Yeah,
there's a
sounds good.
lot of the lifestyle practitioners or in lifestyle medicine, those are the things that, we focus on preserving life and longitudinal. So we look at both lifespan, which is length of years, but then also health span, which is quality of life.
Mhm.
And so we look at the gaps that people are experiencing in between those two dynamics there. A lot of times people are focused on living long, but what's the point of living a long life?
Well, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. We deal with this issue a lot living in an over 55 community and hearing people talk about what they might want to be doing as far as moving into assisted living or end of life thoughts, that kind of a thing. And it really is a very interesting thing to look at um, when you realize that life without living um, is hell.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if to be trapped in a body that's physically able to continue, but mentally it's just not there anymore, or you're just lingering with no real quality. I can't think of anything that I would enjoy less than that. So you guys
Right.
heard me say before, oh, it's the reason why I think I'm blessed to have genes where people just drop dead of a sudden heart attack, rather than develop long-term illnesses and linger and all that. My hand of cards feels somehow a bit more merciful on
Mm-hmm.
everyone involved. It'll be very dramatic and then it'll be over. Okay. So yeah. So I think David, you posed the question. Is that right? I think it could be both, upgrade and
Mm-hmm.
outgrade, depending on the scale at which you're trying to impose that. Now that does bring up a question. Let's say you're outgrade about it, and you really are on a bit of a mission. I could certainly see how I could move even further outgrid and now really want to build an actual business around this subject of preserving life. And however I'm trying to do that, am I still then being driven by the preservation of life value, or am I now being driven by some other variable? Money not being the least of it. So
Mm-hmm.
what's going on here? So does the motivation change? And if the motivation changes, does, how do I say, does the value of a value get negatively impacted when there are additional motivators for living that value? Hmm.
That's
Now,
a great question.
and we're getting
I,
philosophical, but yeah.
and I would say yes. And in fact, I would say that the further out grid you go, that's where you run the risk of your bias contaminating the environment.
Absolutely.
Because you're looking through that lens and you're judging others based on that.
Right. Yeah, I was reading an article just the past few days about, I guess there's a website where you can go and look up any charity and find out what percentage of a donation is actually going to providing
Mm-hmm.
services for whoever the charity was theoretically set up for. And
Right.
it was interesting how many charities. Well, first of all, it's fascinating that as long as you give away 10% or more of the money you collect, you can qualify as a charity as far as the tax laws are concerned.
Right.
Think about that. You can keep 90% of it and still qualify as a charity as long as that 90% is being used for things like paying salaries and stuff that somehow or another related to the operations of the business. But there's no rule that says that your salary has to be capped at a particular amount. So you really do start to wonder how many people are using this kind of, what do I say, socially positive um, kind of front as a way
Mhm.
to actually usurp the dollars or take the dollars from other people's pockets who are thinking they're doing something noble and altruistic and helpful and all that. In reality, what they're doing is making somebody very wealthy.
Absolutely. Say it all the time in healthcare,
Yep.
all the time, many of these organizations. And even for myself, to like what Tim was just talking about, I've been a lifelong vegetarian. So when I look at these so-called plant-based products in the stores,
Mm-hmm.
and look at what the ingredients are. So they started out with this good intention, but you look at what the ingredients are, it's like your body's just not meant to digest it. It's still
Yeah.
processed. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
over time, it's going to have an impact. So I make my own veggie burgers.
Yeah, right, exactly. Linda's a vegetarian. I make her own black bean burgers and all that sort of thing. I mean, they're better, they are cheaper, and they're not that difficult to make. But you
Right.
kind of wonder sometimes, um, well, you wonder what were the values that led someone to vegetarian or vegan eating. For people who are primarily driven by the thought that they don't want to harm another living thing that has a face, well, they might be perfectly happy to still bring in all kinds of non-natural things into their body as long as it didn't come from an animal. Their value system has been satisfied. Where people who become vegetarian because they're more concerned about the way that um, meat, I want to say farming, what's it actually called? Where we keep cattle?
Livestock,
Yeah, livestock, but they live on
cattle ranch.
a ranch. Thank you. Thank you. So the cost of ranching and all that sort of stuff, you go, that's the impact on the environment that is so severe. That's the impact we're trying to get rid of. Yeah, a lot of creatures with faces end up surviving, but our primary motivation in becoming whatever vegan vegetarian is that it's just damaging the planet too much for
Mm.
us to be doing such things. So I think there are a lot of different values that can lead someone to a behavior that is shared by other people who happen to have come to it through a different set of values. So we have to get back to what's really driving it.
Right.
It's really, what are they really valuing? Nevertheless, I certainly didn't hear anything that indicated that that was a universal value that people hold. So instinctual, yes. Maybe a little bit impassioned, yes, but it didn't feel like it survives the test of really being a value that we hold near and dear. So,
No. I wonder if that were the case, would we have any of these kinds of social ills that humanity has suffered from for,
mhm,
since the longest existence?
right, 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 right. Well, and again, it goes back, I think, to preservation of life. We need to specify life of what, who, until what age, you know?
Hmm.
Because this may not hold true after a child reaches a particular age. I mean, maybe it's just me. I've never had children, but maybe it's just me. But if I saw any child or any baby in any kind of distress, I think I have an instinct that tells me I need to look into what's going on, or I need to at least keep an eye on what's going on, because I don't know who else is around or anything like that. But I'm not going to turn my back to a child or a baby. Is that an instinct? Is that a value? And at what age do we kind of go like, nah, they're an adult, they can take care of themselves, you know?
Mm.
And then does it get resurrected when people reach an older age, and now we keep our eye out on for them again, you know? So it returns later in life.
It's interesting.
Yeah. Now we can work our way through this. Things like a quest for knowledge and understanding. Well, where on the change grid are you going to be most naturally on a quest for knowledge and understanding? Does that have a place it tends to live?
Hmm.
Hmm.
That's downgrade,
And
isn't it?
analytical driver.
An analytical driver. Okay, we got yourself over here. Is on a quest for learning and knowledge. Yep. And where are you getting that from, David?
Well, analytical, and they're on a quest.
Well, that's where I got it from. The moment I saw the word quest, I thought quest feels like a driver energy to me.
Right.
Knowledge and understanding definitely feels like an analytical energy to me. So if I'm on a quest for this, well, I'm on a quest. So that tells me it's a driver energy is primary, and then I'm on this quest for this understanding. So I think you're right. It has both an analytical energy and a driver energy. So whether it's an analytical driver or a driven analytical, it would still seem to be out here somewhere. Um, the only other thing I want to throw in is that there are plenty of times when we encounter an upgrade situation, a puzzle. Again, ability is knowledge, skill, and experience. If we feel like we're lacking in the knowledge, lacking in the skill, lacking in the experience, nevertheless, we're facing whatever that issue is. I can certainly see how we're going to feel like we need to figure this out and figure it out fast. We need to, solve the problem. We need to whatever. I don't know that that feels so much like it's a quest for knowledge and understanding as much as it is a quest for getting myself out of the situation I'm in. Now, if after getting myself out of the situation that I'm in, I continue to pursue and study and learn and explore, I can certainly feel my ability going up. And as ability goes up, unless challenge goes up as well, you're going to move down grid, further and further down grid. It's all going to become very predictable, very normal, until sooner or later you end up with a pile of knowledge, and not really any immediate need to use any of it. Hence the value of games like Trivial Pursuit. You'll be very, very useful then. But I do think that there is this learning that happens up grid as well. But the learning is being driven more by an external situation, as opposed to when I think of a true quest for knowledge and understanding, that to me feels a little bit more relaxed. I'm looking a little bit more in my own interests, whatever brings me into play. And that feels like it starts a little bit, well, still inside the green circle, but it starts kind of on the down grid, out grid kind of, general vicinity here. And as I do it more and more and more and more, fine, I end up a little outside of the green circle. I decide to
Yeah,
really.
I'm wondering if this quest, uh, semantically they're using that word, but it almost seems like biologically knowledge and learning, those kinds of things are quite instinctual. They're quite natural. If you think about like interoception, the internal states are always managing this homeostasis, but is scanning outwardly, right? So those kinds, something piques our interest and it gets to the RAS, the reticular activation system, and we
Yep.
want to learn it. But that's not I don't know if I would call that a quest per se, as it
Well, and I'd be curious to know what level
is
of
natural
consciousness
curiosity.
it could
Right.
be, but do
And
you
then we're
think
starting to see it everywhere.
right, but do you think that the processes you've just described are happening at the conscious, deliberate, intentional level, or is your body just doing it because your body's the boss?
The body picks up on those things that we become aware of. So, like when the reticular activation system is activated by something that piques your interest and then it's matched with a certain emotion, all of a sudden, seemingly, you'll see it everywhere. And so it starts, that's that neurochemical soup we talked about. It starts kicking in acetylcholine and these kinds of things where you might develop a desire to not only just learn it, but to like peek behind the curtain. And then you set out on this whole path. And that's just
Now
a
you're on.
natural thing, right?
Well, it's a natural thing, um, but I can see how it can become a quest. I guess the question is, do you believe that all humans possess that and behave in accordance with that?
They probably don't necessarily behave in accordance with, because we're talking about unconscious processes like
Yeah.
those systems that I just talked about. They're connected to the autonomic nervous system, so they
Right, right,
happen
right.
automatically
Yep,
beneath the radar of awareness.
yep. So I can certainly see that we all share this ability to figure out a puzzle. If you look at the change grid, you can see I'm squiggling around slightly up grid. Who knows? It could be way up here. But I can kind of see where instinctually or whatever, we all can do that, or we all naturally are compelled to do that. But the idea, or rather, the decision to educate oneself, I've always felt was voluntary.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, how many of us, well, come on, most of us on the call are professional trainers. How many of us have encountered our fair share of students who simply did not want to learn whatever it was that we were teaching? They showed up because they had to show up. You know, they weren't being rude or disruptive, but you could just tell they simply were not into the learning experience. I mean, forget judging the material; they weren't into the learning experience at all. Have we all had our fair share of students like that? So yeah, ignorance is a choice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, in fact, something I was going to share with you guys. One moment. So, oh, what on earth did I just do? Doesn't matter. I found a little meme, and one person was asking another person, "What's the difference between ignorance and apathy?" And the other person
I don't
says,
care.
"Yeah, that's right." The person says, "I don't know, and I don't care." Exactly. All right. So still, I don't know that we've found anything we'd call a universal value. A social cooperation, we've already decided, was something that's more about a need, a response to what's going on. So let's get down to some of these other ones. And again, on any of these, if you'd like to look at where does this live on the change grid, like where does justice and fairness exist on the change grid? Justice and fairness. Where would you need to be on the change grid to naturally be just and fair?
In the green circle?
In the green circle. Maybe leaning a little bit towards the amiable side of things. Yeah. Tim, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking closer to the PowerPoint.
Yeah. It's definitely one here when I think about, for us to truly be fair and just, I know that we're supposed to be detached from what's going on, but I think it's about detachment while we're learning about what's going on. At a certain point in time, if we're put in the position to make a decision, serve as judge or whatever, obviously we have to come to some conclusion. And then we're talking about being fair and just. I would like to think we're pulling in a little bit of those amiable qualities, the amiable, or rather the driven amiable kinds of qualities that say that ultimately the reason why we need to have laws, we need to have discussions about fairness and justice is because there is a certain part of the population that is treating others unfairly, unjustly. And so even this whole discussion around fairness and justice implies bringing something into balance, where some segment of the population is being underserved, abused, neglected, or whatever, and it's being done by a group that's taking more than their kind of fair share. If everyone treated one another fairly and justly, would we even need a court system? You know, so
Yeah.
you know,
That's the one I don't understand. I know Shags is an attorney, but I never understood how the judges, like, all this stuff that's going on now in the States with how they make their decisions. It doesn't seem like it's based on what you just described. It's
well,
based, the
keep in
just and the
mind that
fairness stuff.
yeah, keep in mind that the vast majority of judges, mediators, anyone who's holding that kind of a role, the vast majority of them are doing their job extremely well, which is why they receive no real notice for what's going on. The truth is that it operates under a set of rules, and as long as those rules are followed, then things are pretty good. The question arises when we have to say that, and I think I learned this on Star Trek of all places, that um, justice without humanity
Mm,
is unjust.
that's a good one. That's it
I
right
think that's
there.
what it really was, that you can't just like obey the rules because the rules say so. You
Right.
have to factor in there are certain circumstances that have to enable us to make other decisions.
So T, I'm glad you said that. If you have not seen the movie The Great Debaters, I would recommend it.
Mm-hmm.
There is towards the end of that movie, I think they touch on what you just said. So there is this small, predominantly Black college that's debating the Harvard debate team.
Mm-hmm.
And the Harvard debate team is making the point that um, civilization requires us to live by laws, and that without laws, then we have an uncivilized society.
Mm-hmm.
So the young man from the smaller college gets up, and his opening line is this. He says, because they're arguing that point, and he says in his opening line, "I'm from Texas, and in Texas, it's legal to hang a Black man."
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that that's the crux of what you just laid out for us. And there are, until we have an expanded experience and knowledge and awareness around our environment and the people, that diverse group of people that share that environment with us, it's very easy for us to walk around thinking that the way I see justice and fairness is correct.
Mm-hmm.
And until we began to hear from other people and their experiences, and that whole issue of power dynamics, it can make it very, very complicated. And what we discover is that everybody's not having that shared experience around fairness and justice.
Very interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I feel the same
And
way
that was a great
about
comment,
healthcare.
Tim. I really appreciated that. I'm sorry I missed a good earlier part of your conversation, but that was I appreciate that comment.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep.
The same is true about healthcare. I always tell these physicians here that, physicians understand the physicality, you understand diagnosis, but there's a whole humanity beyond that diagnosis. Until you meet it, I don't know that you're necessarily prepared to truly help people in the health and well-being. You have to be able to greet that humanity. And that seems to be missing from healthcare systems, thought in terms of what is health, let alone what is care.
Yeah, and it may very well go back to what are the rules that govern healthcare, and then you have to ask who came up with those rules and why is it wrong to deviate from them and all that. So let me give you guys a little example from my own life about this whole justice and fairness kind of thing. Yeah, in fact, Shag just says doctors are now turning to ChatGPT to generate gentle ways to break bad news. ChatGPT does tend to lean towards the diplomatic. So, all right. So let me tell you a little story about me. I'd be curious to know what your personal experiences have been as well. But I'm 66 years old. You can imagine how many times I have been called for jury duty. And would you be surprised to find out that after being called for jury duty so many times, I have never been impaneled even once. They always let me go. Now, I know why they let me go. It's because they ask me a question, and I always answer the question the same way. They ask me if I would be able to follow the law and cast my vote based on what the law says is correct. And I always say, I will vote my conscience. And the moment you say, I'll vote my conscience, the chances of them keeping you around are pretty slim. It seems that although we still have juries and jury selection, all that sort of stuff. If you've got a lot of people on a jury who have already said that rather than listening to the specific situations that this case involves, you're simply going to enforce the law the way the law is written, then there's really no reason to have a jury. I mean, artificial intelligence can apply a law dispassionately and, render a verdict accordingly. The whole point of being on a jury is that we are your peers and we're hearing what happened. And even though you may very well have done something that violates some law on the book, I'm sure you did, or how did you even get brought to trial? That doesn't mean you didn't have good reasons for doing it that made it okay at the time for you to be able to do whatever it is that needs to be done. You guys with me on this? You might have heard about it's called jury nullification, that juries actually have the ability to nullify a law, at least as far as how it applies in a given person's situation, in a given case's situation. Were you guys aware of that? Is that news to you? Is that something,
Wow.
You just wowed that?
I never heard of it. I never sat on or been called to sit on a jury.
Well,
Um,
I've always wanted to be impaneled, but I'm not going to lie to them and say, no, I'll follow the law when I'm really going to vote my conscience. So, Kathy, what do you have to
Yeah,
say?
no, I've never been, I mean, I've been called many times too, and I've never actually served, and I would really enjoy, I shouldn't say that. I served for, I went to the courtroom for a week and then was never
Right.
selected.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
But,
That's
but,
happened
but
too.
yeah, but I've heard the term jury nullification, but I never knew what it meant.
Yeah.
So that's an
Yeah.
interesting,
Jury nullification is simply acknowledging the fact that the law, although we try to depict the law as being blind, in truth, we have to look at the reasons why someone did whatever they did. So, and I can give you lots of cases where this actually holds true. Well, it drives the prosecutors insane because the prosecutors are going like, no, we've got a case. The law says what the law says. All you have to do is, do your job and acknowledge that the law says what the law says. Well, a good jury, according to the way that our country is really supposed to be working, says that's all fine and dandy. We're here to hear the whole story, get the entire truth so we can make a decision accordingly. I'll give you two quick insights about this. You can imagine back in the days of slavery and slaves, running away from their situations, coming to the north, etc. Countless cases came to courts that were all about returning these runaway slaves who are now in the north, returning them to the South because they did break the law that was on the book at the time. Can you imagine if jurors refused to nullify the law as it was stated on the books, whether or not any of those individuals would ever have found freedom? So
Interesting.
yeah, this is a real reason why jury nullification is such an important ability. What if you found out, you be the juror, and you find out that this woman, and I think there's been movies about these kinds of situations, that this woman or this child or whoever had been physically, emotionally abused for years upon years, and finally found an opportunity, and they killed the person who was torturing them or whatever. Now the law says you killed another person, and so therefore you're guilty of manslaughter, murder. Probably they'd give you first degree murder, because if you were in that situation, I'm sure you've been given this a lot of thought for a lot of time. So do you guys believe that someone who kills someone who's been torturing them is guilty of murder? Or is that really, no, that's really self-defense. It just,
yeah, I believe it's self-defense, and we have gone both ways in our trials around that, in this country. Yeah.
sure. Well, that's the whole point of jury nullification. We have the ability to decide whether or not, well, first of all, I have to decide whether or not the crime was committed. But even if the crime has been committed, do you agree that this person should be punished for this, or do you believe there was good reason why they did whatever it is they did? So yeah, so you can see why the prosecutor isn't fond of people who might nullify the
So,
law.
so when you say there's nullification, process, they actually get rid of the law itself or rewrite it?
No, no, no. Well, only the legislation can actually change a law, but the jury has the power at the case level to absolve someone of the guilt of it, or just say to them it's extenuating circumstances. The law does not apply under these circumstances. The law never imagined that these circumstances existed, so could not have been the right law to put in place at the time.
Interesting, because I wonder, is that what some of these civil rights cases were? Like when I first came to the States, I sat in on a reenactment of Plessy versus Ferguson case,
Yep.
which was like, I think a black porter who had to give up his seat on a train or something. But that's where I met John Lewis. And so John Lewis, Cory Booker wasn't a known politician at the time, but they were playing the judges, and then they had a panel that was playing like the Supreme Court, and the John Lewis and Cory Booker were going against each other on this case, and that was a fascinating thing to discover how that was overturned, because the guy was going to get sentenced or something, I believe, for um, not wanting to give up his seat or something like that, which was the law.
Yeah, there was some law in the book at the time.
Right.
And some people, and think about this, juries have the ability to change the world, because the moment that jury understands those circumstances and casts their votes accordingly, they now set precedent. And next time a case arises, they can refer to that case and say, in that particular case, the person was not found guilty, blah, blah, blah. So ultimately, the jury can change, the way that our society operates. Nevertheless, I will promise you this. If while you are at any kind of a jury selection kind of thing, you dare even mention the concept of jury nullification to the people, the potential jurors around you, you will be brought before the judge and accused of jury tampering. And yeah, it's absolutely true. It is a very, very dangerous thing when all you're really doing is informing people of what their actual role is as a juror and their actual powers as a juror. If you let them know they have something other than what they're being told, you can easily be brought in front of the judge and accused of jury tampering. So got to be very careful around it. So the only thing you can say is, I'm going to vote my conscience. And the moment you know they hear those words, they know that you know what jury nullification is.
Interesting.
And if prosecutor doesn't want you, but the defense attorneys definitely want you, and so you'll end up becoming debated during voir dire, and you'll be kicked off. You'll never be.
Chris put something interesting in the chats that he said there's a distinction between justice and fairness. Where is fairness on the change grid? Is that in the green circle as well?
Yeah, I would think we're on the change grid. Do you think people are most naturally going to be fair to someone? Whether fair.
At the PowerPoint.
I'm thinking it's the closer you are to the PowerPoint, the more detached you are from the situation. So the more able you are to say that there is an imbalance. This is how to correct the imbalance. And therefore, that's what you're advocating.
So how would we describe the distinction between justice and fairness? Because what's fair to one person may not be fair to the next.
I don't really know. I'd be curious to look up the two words and ask ChatGPT.
I'm going to take that. I'm going to take it. Yeah. Justice has to do with the legal system. Mm-hmm. You know, and this is my understanding. I could be all wet here. Justice has to do with was the legal system served? Were the rights of that individual served in a court, or in fairness applies much more broadly across the board and has to do with is more values based, but yeah. Fairness and fairness can be used in a variety of different situations, and it's also in the eye of the beholder for the most part.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yep.
Is that
I mean, think that makes a nice distinction, that justice really is more about when we're in that formal setting.
Hey, T.
Yes, go right ahead, Chris.
So I remember a minister years ago talked about how you don't want God to be fair. You want him to be just. Because if God was fair, that meant, just like in your example, if you committed a murder, murder is going to be viewed as murder. You took a human life. That's fair based off of rule. But when you think about just takes into consideration the other factors. Like you could just, when you're just, you could take in those factors of, well, you killed a person that was holding you captive, that was doing you harm. That's just. So that's where a distinction that was being made between what's being fair and then what's being just. I think Brian said something earlier about how it takes in those extenuating factors, especially when it comes to healthcare. It's taking into the rest of the pieces to the puzzle versus just standard or law or rule.
Interesting.
Very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I like this conversation.
Now let me throw another little element into this whole. And by the way, if you guys are interested about jury nullification, you can simply Google it, and there's all kinds of YouTube videos and all that. It's a big thing. In fact, there's a whole kind of movement about educating voters about how juries actually are supposed to operate, why juries have the ability to nullify something, and what you should look out for and all that sort of thing, so you don't get yourself in trouble. But I want you to know that there's at least one group of people who will nullify all day long. Now, obviously it's the jury is nullifying the law in a particular thing. The jury isn't being nullified. Well, there's a group of people who nullify laws all the time, and those are police officers. So when you think about how police work is supposed to be done, or if it was going to be done strictly by the book, if you broke the law, then you get whatever the consequence happens to be. It might be a ticket. It might be a summons to come to court. You might get arrested. But if X is true, then Y will happen. But how often do police officers pull people over for a traffic infraction of some sort or another, and they listen to the person's story or whatever, and the police officer says, "This time I'll let you go with a warning." What did that police officer just do? That police officer just made the decision on behalf of the entire population who has agreed to operate under these laws that this time this law does not apply to you. And so one individual has the power in a given day or whatever to nullify whether or not you're going to be punished to the degree to which you're going to be exposed to punishment. They don't have to write you a ticket for how fast you were going over the speed limit. They might just write you one for 10 over instead of 20 over because they like you and they don't want you to have trouble with your insurance. Or they heard you say the words, "Oh yeah, my dad is a police officer," and think you're that, well, then we'll just ignore the law because you're part of the law enforcement family. On the one hand, you kind of understand that those things happen, and maybe sometimes those things are okay. Maybe you've been on the benefit side of receiving that sort of nullification. But does it bother anybody that you're basically being told that police officers can do it all day, every day, and we're not even going to ask any questions about it? But for you to vote your conscience in a court of law could be something that could get you in trouble for jury tampering. So
interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting to me. Very interesting.
I'll never bring it up, T.
Yeah. Let's say I'm going to vote my conscience.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that's all I got to say. I'm just going to vote my conscience. And all is fine. And by the way, before you are finally impaneled, you do all have to raise your hand either before impaneling begins or at the end of it. And you're going to have to say that you swear that you are going to follow the law. And if I'd ever gotten that far, I would refuse to take that oath, take that pledge. because I don't want someone to come along later and say, you didn't follow the law. You decided to make an exception. Therefore, did you lie when you took that little oath? So, yeah, anyway, so, yeah.
Wow.
No shortage of complicated sorts of things. Nevertheless, I believe that if we are where we're talking about for justice and fairness and all that, we would also at the same time feel as though the laws that we're talking about are constructs that were developed and decided upon by a different group of people in a different set of circumstances at a different time in history. And maybe, just maybe, it's time for that law to change. Maybe it's never going to change until we can bring to the attention of the masses that it no longer applies to the degree it might have done at some other point in time.
Right. That's the part that I was saying, like, I didn't understand. So like in some of these cases that, you know, I was always told, like, the attorneys and judges are looking at precedent of the law.
Yep.
And they're trying to apply that. But to your point, what you just described, that might not apply to the time that we're in now.
Exactly.
And especially when they, you know, like the police shootings, you know, to me isn't a political thing as it is like, okay, why are they protected by unions and all these different kinds of things? Well, it may be time to look at the law to hold people accountable and responsible with that kind of power.
Yep.
But
yeah. Yeah.
you know, but
that's
if you just
happening
base it on the
more.
precedent, you know, then it's just going to be this more of the same, it seems.
Right, because of things like you were talking about the unions. There's also qualified immunity that comes into play, and so maybe there's a lot of things that need to be altered. But anyway, my point is that when it comes to fairness and all that, it's something that's in the middle of the change grid, and you just have to always be thinking what the motivations are behind whatever the decision happens to be. Okay, well, so we didn't make it any deeper down our list, but I did think you know, we could certainly talk about some of these, like spiritual and transcendental exploration, learning from the past, courage and bravery, wisdom and knowledge sharing. At the surface, I still don't feel like any of these things are universal values. They may be things that are agreed upon by a lot of people or within a given kind of culture: hospitality and generosity, perseverance and resilience, peace and harmony. So I think if we can next time around just crank our way through the list and see where they live on the change grid, what I'm hoping, I'll go ahead and give you my prediction. Oops, if I can get my image to reappear on the screen. Come along, there we are. Maybe we don't share a particular value, but what we share is this interior of the change grid. We share this green circle, and that inside of this green circle, humans will all operate in similar kinds of ways, regardless of culture, regardless of whatever. And we may not do absolutely everything that everybody does inside of the green circle, but we do have this green circle in common. If that ends up being true, then the question is going to be, is there a value, a belief, a practice, something that is at the exact center? And that would serve to be the kind of core of where the human value system comes from. Is this interesting, or is this like what?
Yeah, see, that's the homeostasis, right? Like the balance, the body's always looking for balance. And I think that's what that, to me at least, that's what the green circle represents, is this balance of things.
Yep, that's it. And maybe that's what we all share, this feeling of being balanced. That's something we might have in common. Don't know. We'll explore a little bit more and see where we end up. So with that, I'll thank you all very much for joining us today and wish you a great weekend. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Great weekend, everybody.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.